Let's talk about where we are, how we got there, where you think we're going to go. But first I want to ask you a question, because in the first part of this program we heard both of the Democratic senators, the U.S. senators from the state, talk about the minority of the minority, and we've heard the talk about fringe. At the end of the day, you were one of 140 plus Republicans who voted against the deal that came about. Does that make you part of the minority or the fringe?
That's a great talking point on their end. I think that what it is you've got a group of people that are concerned about the direction and, frankly, the way that this last deal was put together. Everybody wanted it to end. The question is, are we going to have these unconditional debt increases without any sort of substantial, substantive, significant changes, and that's where I drew the line. And frankly, the people that wrote the law, the people that voted for the law, are now unwilling to live under the provisions of that law, and that to me is unacceptable, and I heard that loud and clear from the people of Michigan as well.
And when you say that law, you speak of the Affordable Care Act?
The Affordable Care Act, you know, quote unquote Obamacare. Look, they all knew what was in it. That was a Senate amendment that was put in place, and I think the cynicism that continues to get built up between the American people and government is because of those kinds of things, and that to me is a pretty fundamental element.
I need not tell you that it didn't take long as this process started. A week out, we started to hear about the possibility of a shutdown. Then a weekend, people were saying when it's going to be over. And 2 weeks in, they're up against the debt ceiling. The poll numbers did not play well for Republicans anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, some places maybe a little better than others. But by and large, Republicans, at least in the court of public opinion, and at least for now, took it on the chin. Was it worth it?
Well, we got beat, there's no doubt. And when you have an unwilling dance partner with Harry Reid in the Senate, who said absolutely no negotiations, it makes it very, very difficult. And I think, frankly, there's some of my friends on the right that were surprised at some of the directions that conservatives were willing to go, moving off of total defunding to saying, hey, let's hit the pause button here for a year because it has significant issues, to saying, hey, if we're going to do this for the employer mandate side, why not the individual mandate side? All the way down to saying, hey, why don't you live by the law the way that it was written, so that members of Congress and their staff are going to have to live under it and live in those exchanges. And to have every single one of those and a number of others in between rejected, with all the time saying, you know, we're not going to negotiate. Hostages, or hostage takers, arsonists, zealots. I mean, the rhetoric was absolutely amazing. Makes it very difficult to cut through that and actually make real progress.
We can talk more about the process. We can talk more about where we've been, but I am very interested in where we're going, because when I talked with you both on Wednesday night and again on Thursday morning, you had significant questions, concerns, I will say that that's the way I saw them, about what happens on December 13th and January 15th and February 7th, because what this deal does is simply moves to new deadlines, and the idea is that Senator Stabenow, who was just on, along with Senator Murray, will go with Congressman Ryan, who you know very well, and they'll try to talk about the budget, try to put something together. I asked out loud in the story that I did on Thursday, why will in 60 days this same group of people who haven't been able to do anything for multiple years be able to pull this off? Is there some reason to believe that it can happen now?
I think if you looked up kicking the can down the road in a thesaurus, this would be Exhibit A. I mean, here we go again, and I'm not convinced that this short-term deal certainly didn't do it, and I'm not convinced that this, whatever the next step is going to be able to solve these long-term problems, because we're not using long-term solutions. You've got people that aren't willing to look, you know, further down the road than the next 3 months, the next election cycle. We've got to get serious about how we're going to deal with our spending and the debt, this mountain of debt that's getting piled on our kids. And obviously, I'm very concerned about the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. And by the way, you know, to say the exchanges have had glitches is very charitable in general. nonetheless, you know, it's not just about the parameters of it. There's security issues that are surrounding it. You know, so it's not just whether people can log on or not. It's going to be what's going to be happening to their information and exposed. So there's some deep questions that need to be answered, and I'm not convinced that the structure that came up with is going to allow us to get to those long-term things. It might have solved it very short-term. It opened up government, which, again, I wanted to do as well, which is why I voted over 20 times to fund pieces of the government like WIC, like National Institutes of Health, like making sure that it's something as petty as opening up the World War II Memorial after they had closed it down, that we were able to take care of those things. I think that's what people expect out of their government.
I don't want to get too far off the beaten path, and I asked you about this on one of our earlier interviews, but I wonder if Republicans, maybe you included, maybe not, are second-guessing the idea of going into this shutdown. And again, the blame can lie wherever through one's political prism you would like to place it. The point is that by having all of the focus of the media on the government shutdown on October 1st, some of those glitches that you talked about with the Affordable Care Act, which have been considerable, as admitted to by the White House and virtually everybody in government, didn't become the issue. Did you lose a talking point as Republicans by being in a government shutdown when the Affordable Care Act's exchanges came online?
Yeah, I don't view it as a talking point, and I guess it's maybe semantics, but it's another example of it not working, and I think that did get lost in there, and sort of the thicket of the stories was more about the shutdown than the actual problems as they were trying to roll that out. So. Absolutely. I think that, you know, hindsight being 20/20, there's a lot of things that I certainly would have done different had I had the ability to control that. I think our leadership is at that point as well.
I don't have a reset button, but if I did, and if I could go to Washington and push that reset button and say, your short-term memory is now gone, and all those things that this side said about this side, and this side said about this side, and these people said about the president said about these people, that's all, you've all forgotten that. There are still a number of issues that are left. Entitlement reform that the president has talked about and Republicans have talked about. When they say those words, they sound the same, but they mean different things. The budget and balancing the budget and long-term spending. Everybody says they want to work on that, but they mean different things. A full budget deal from a Republican perspective would involve less spending. A full budget deal from the standpoint of the Democrats would include more revenues. The reform of entitlements would probably entail more revenues. How likely is it, given that reset button doesn't really exist, how likely is it that you can get someplace where everybody can start saying, yes, I think we have a path?
Well, I'll add one in on that, and I think we saw that in the last 2 days as Harry Reid and others were coming back. It's really about the spending. They don't like the sequester cuts, the across-the-board cuts, not just because of the way that it was implemented. I'm not a huge fan of that either. It's like going into your garden and saying, well, we're just going to whack everything off at 18 inches and say that we just weeded the garden. Well, you just took out the beans and the corn as well as those weeds. We'd be better to go in and dig out individually. But it's not about just the implementation of it. They don't like the number. They don't like the fact that for 2 years in a row, since the first time since the end of the Korean War, 2 years in a row we've seen government spending go down in real terms. That is what they don't like. And suddenly, when you had Susan Collins and Joe Manchin working on a deal that would have preserved the sequester cuts, the spending levels, and reshuffle them, but preserve those numbers, that suddenly became unacceptable to Harry Reid and a number of his other colleagues. So I think that we're finally seeing the real tip of the iceberg here for them, which is they want to see an expansion of government and an expansion of spending, not a contraction of that. So that is going to be very difficult philosophically. How do you get there? Because it's not about partisanship. It is about philosophical differences, though. You know, the proper size, role, and scope of government, and whether it's TARP, whether it's you know, the Affordable Care Act, whether it's our spending levels, it's all going to play into it. And this is going to be a tough couple of years.
Lawmakers in Washington have until mid-December to come up with a long-term spending plan, even though the continuing resolution goes until the middle of January. As for that debt limit, look for that to expire on February 7th.